The Gulag Archipelago by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. Part 1. The Prison Industry. Chapter 1. Arrest. How do people get to this clandestine archipelago? Hour by hour planes fly there, ships steer their course there, and trains thunder off to it, but all with nary a mark on them to tell of their destination. And at ticket windows, or at travel bureaus for Soviet or foreign tourists, the employees would be astounded if you ever were to ask for a ticket to go there. They know nothing, and they've never heard of the archipelago as a whole, or of any one of its innumerable islands. Those who go to the archipelago to administer it get there via the training schools of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Those who go there to be guards are conscripted via the military conscription centres, and those who, like you and me, dear reader, go there to die, must get there solely and compulsorily via arrest. Arrest! Need it be said that it is a breaking point in your life, a bolt of lightning which has scored a direct hit on you, that it is an unassimilable spiritual earthquake not every person can cope with, as a result of which people often slip into insanity? The universe has as many different centers as there are living beings in it. Each of us is a center of the universe, and that universe is shattered when they hiss at you. You are under arrest. If you are arrested, can anything else remain unshattered by this cataclysm? But the darkened mind is incapable of embracing these displacements in our universe, and both the most sophisticated and the veriest simpleton among us, drawing on all life's experience, can only gasp out, "Me? What for?" And this is a question which, though repeated millions and millions of times before, has yet to receive an answer. Arrest is an instantaneous shattering thrust, expulsion, somersault from one state into another. We have been happily born, or perhaps have unhappily dragged our weary way down the long and crooked streets of our lives, past all kinds of walls and fences made of rotting wood, rammed earth, brick, concrete, iron railings. We have never given a thought to what lies behind them. We have never tried to penetrate them with our vision or our understanding. But there is where the Gulag country begins, right next to us, 2 yards away from us. In addition, we have failed to notice an enormous number of closely fitted, well-disguised doors and gates in those fences. All those gates were prepared for us, every last one. And all of a sudden the fateful gate swings quickly open, and 4 white male hands, unaccustomed to physical labour, but nonetheless strong and tenacious, grab us by the leg, arm, collar, cap, ear, and drag us in like a sack, and the gate behind us, the gate to our past life, is slammed shut once and for all. That's all there is to it. You are arrested. And you'll find nothing better to respond with than a lamb-like bleat, "Me? What for?" That's what arrest is. It's a blinding flash and a blow which shifts the present instantly into the past, and the impossible into omnipotent actuality. That's all. And neither for the first hour nor for the first day will you be able to grasp anything else, except that in your desperation the fake circus moon will blink at you. It's a mistake. They'll set things right. And everything which is by now comprised in the traditional, even literary, image of an arrest will pile up and take shape, not in your own disordered memory, but in what your family and your neighbours in your apartment remember: the sharp nighttime ring or the rude knock at the door, the insolent entrance of the unwiped jackboots of the unsleeping state security operatives, the frightened and cowed civilians witness at their backs. And what function does this civilian witness serve? The victim doesn't even dare think about it, and the operatives don't remember. But that's what the regulations call for, and so he has to sit there all night long and sign in the morning. For the witness jerked from his bed, it is torture too, to go out night after night to help arrest his own neighbours and acquaintances. The traditional image of arrest is also trembling hands packing for the victim, a change of underwear, a piece of soap, something to eat, and no one knows what is needed, what is permitted, what clothes are best to wear, and the security agents keep interrupting and hurrying you. You don't need anything, they'll feed you there. It's warm there. It's all lies. They keep hurrying you to frighten you. The traditional image of arrest is also what happens afterward, when the poor victim has been taken away. It is an alien, brutal, and crushing force totally dominating the apartment for hours on end, a breaking, ripping open, pulling from the walls, emptying things from wardrobes and desks onto the floor, shaking, dumping out and ripping apart, piling up mountains of litter on the floor, and the crunch of things being trampled beneath jackboots. And nothing is sacred in a search. During the arrest of the locomotive engineer Inoshin, a tiny coffin stood in his room containing the body of his newly dead child. The jurists dumped the child's body out of the coffin and searched it. They shake sick people out of their sick beds and they unwind bandages to search beneath them. For those left behind after the arrest, there is the long tail end of a wrecked and devastated life, and the attempts to go and deliver food parcels. But from all the windows the answer comes in barking voices, "Nobody here by that name, never heard of him." Yes, and in the worst days in Leningrad, it took 5 days of standing in crowded lines just to get to that window, and it may be only after half a year or a year that the arrested person responds at all. Or else the answer is tossed out, deprived of the right to correspond. And that means, once and for all, no right to correspond. And that almost for certain means, has been shot. That's how we picture arrest to ourselves. The kind of night arrest described is, in fact, a favourite, because it has important advantages. Everyone living in the apartment is thrown into a state of terror by the first knock at the door. The arrested person is torn from the warmth of his bed. He is in a daze, half asleep, helpless, and his judgment is befogged. In a night arrest, the state security men have a superiority in numbers. There are many of them, armed against one person who hasn't even finished buttoning his trousers. During the arrest and search, it is highly improbable that a crowd of potential supporters will gather at the entrance. The unhurried, step-by-step visits, first to one apartment, then to another, tomorrow to a third and a fourth, provide an opportunity for the security operations personnel to be deployed with the maximum efficiency and to imprison many more citizens of a given town than the police force itself numbers. In addition, there's an advantage to night arrests in that neither the people in neighbouring apartment houses nor those on the city streets can see how many have been taken away. Arrests which frighten the closest neighbours are no event at all to those farther away. It's as if they had not taken place. Along that same asphalt ribbon on which the Black Mariahs scurry at night, a tribe of youngsters strides by day with banners, flowers and gay, untroubled songs. But those who take, whose work consists solely of arrests, for whom the horror is boringly repetitive, have a much broader understanding of how arrests operate. They operate according to a large body of theory, and innocence must not lead one to ignore this. The science of arrest is an important segment of the course on general penology, and has been propped up with a substantial body of social theory. Arrests are classified according to various criteria: nighttime and daytime, at home, at work, during a journey, first-time arrests and repeats, individual and group arrests. Arrests are distinguished by the degree of surprise required, the amount of resistance expected, even though in tens of millions of cases no resistance was expected, and in fact there was none. Arrests are also differentiated by the thoroughness of the required search, by instructions either to make out or not to make out an inventory of confiscated property or seal a room or apartment, to arrest the wife after the husband and send the children to an orphanage, or to send the rest of the family into exile, or to send the old folks to a labour camp too. No. Arrests vary widely in form. In 1926, Irma Mendel, a Hungarian, obtained through the Comintern 2 front-row tickets to the Bolshoi Theatre. Interrogator Kliegel was courting her at the time, and she invited him to go with her. They sat through the show very affectionately, and when it was over, he took her straight to the Lubyanka. And if on a flowering June day in 1927 on Kuznetsky Most, the plump-cheeked, red-headed beauty Anna Skripnikova, who had just bought some navy blue material for a dress, climbed into a handsome cab with a young man about town, you can be sure it wasn't a lover's tryst at all, as the cabman understood very well and showed by his frown. He knew the organs don't pay. It was an arrest. In just a moment they would turn on to Lubyanka and enter the black maw of the gates. No, one certainly cannot say that daylight arrest during a journey, or arrest in the middle of a crowd has ever been neglected in our country. However, it has always been clean cut. And, most surprising of all, the victims, in cooperation with the security men, have conducted themselves in the noblest conceivable manner, so as to spare the living from witnessing the death of the condemned. Not everyone can be arrested at home, with a preliminary knock at the door, and if there is a knock, then it has to be the house manager or else the postman. And not everyone can be arrested at work either. If the person to be arrested is vicious, then it's better to seize him outside his ordinary melee, away from his family and colleagues, from those who share his views, from any hiding places. It is essential that he have no chance to destroy, hide, or pass on anything to anyone. VIPs in the military or the party were sometimes first given new assignments, ensconced in private railway car, and then arrested en route. Some obscure, ordinary mortal, scared to death by epidemic arrests all around him and already depressed for a week by sinister glances from his chief, is suddenly summoned to the local party committee, where he is beamingly presented with a vacation ticket to a Sochi sanatorium. The rabbit is overwhelmed and immediately concludes that his fears were groundless. After expressing his gratitude, he hurries home triumphant to pack his suitcase. It is only 2 hours till train time, and he scolds his wife for being too slow. He arrives at the station with time to spare, and there in the waiting room, or at the bar, he is hailed by an extraordinarily pleasant young man. "Don't you remember me? Peter Ivanitch?" Peter Ivanitch has difficulty remembering. Well, not exactly, you see, although the young man, however, is overflowing with friendly concern. "Come now, how can that be? I'll have to remind you." And he bows respectfully to Peter Ivanitch's wife. "You must forgive us. I'll keep him only 1 minute." The wife accedes, and trustingly the husband lets himself be led away by the arm, forever for 10 years. Or for 10 years. The station is thronged and no one notices anything. Oh, you citizens who love to travel, do not forget that in every station there are a GPU branch and several prison cells. This importunity of alleged acquaintances is so abrupt that only a person who has not had the wolfish preparation of camp life is likely employee of the American embassy by the name of Alexander Dolgon. You cannot be arrested in broad daylight on Gorky Street, right by your central telegraph office. Your unfamiliar friend dashes through the press of the crowd and opens his plundering arms to embrace you. "Sasha!" He simply shouts at you with no effort to be inconspicuous. "Hey, pal! Long time no see. Come on over, let's get out of the way." At that moment, a Pobeda sedan draws up to the curb, and several days later, TASS will issue an angry statement to all the papers alleging that informed circles of the Soviet government have no information on the disappearance of Alexander Dolgun. But what's so unusual about that? Our boys have carried out such arrests in Brussels, which was where Zora Blednov was seized, not just in Moscow. One has to give the organs their due. In an age when public speeches, the plays in our theatres and women's fashions all seem to have come off assembly lines, arrests can be of the most varied kind. They take you aside in a factory corridor after you have had your pass checked and you're arrested. They take you from a military hospital with a temperature of 102, as they did with Arns Bernstein. And the doctor will not raise a peep about your arrest, just let him try. They'll take you right off the operating table, as they took N.M. Vorobyev, a school inspector, in 1936, in the middle of an operation for stomach ulcer, and drag you off to a cell as they did him, half alive and all bloody, as Karpunich recollects. In the gastronomy, the fancy food store, you are invited to the special order department and arrested there. You are arrested by a religious pilgrim whom you have put up for the night. For the sake of Christ, you are arrested by a meter man who has come to read your electric meter. You are arrested by a bicyclist who has run into you on the street, by a railway conductor, a taxi driver, a savings bank teller, the manager of a movie theatre. Any one of them can arrest you, and you notice the concealed maroon-coloured identification card only when it's too late. Sometimes arrests even seem to be a game. There is so much superfluous imagination, so much well-fed energy invested in them. After all, the victim would not resist anyway. Is it that the security agents want to justify their employment and their numbers? After all, it would seem enough to send notices to all the rabbits marked for arrest, and they would show up obediently at the designated hour and minute at the iron gates of state security with a bundle in their hands, ready to occupy a piece of floor in the cell for which they were intended. And in fact, that's the way collective farmers are arrested. Who wants to go all the way to a hut at night with no roads to travel on? They are summoned to the village Soviet and arrested there. Manual workers are called into the office. Of course, every machine has a point at which it is overloaded, beyond which it cannot function. In the strained and overloaded years of 1945 and 1946, when trainload after trainload poured in from Europe to be swallowed up immediately and sent off to the Gulag, all that excessive theatricality went out the window, and the whole theory suffered greatly. All the fuss and feathers of ritual went flying in every direction, and the arrest of tens of thousands took on the appearance of a squalid roll call. They stood there with lists, read off the names of those on one train, loaded them onto another, and that was the whole arrest. For several decades, political arrests were distinguished in our country precisely by the fact that people were arrested who were guilty of nothing, and were therefore unprepared to put up any resistance whatsoever. There was a general feeling of being destined for destruction, a sense of having nowhere to escape but the GPU NKVD, which incidentally, given our internal passport system, was quite accurate. And even in the fever of epidemic arrests, when people leaving for work said farewell to their families every day because they could not be certain they would return at night, even then almost no one tried to run away, and only in rare cases did people commit suicide. And that was exactly what was required. A submissive sheep is a find for a wolf. This submissiveness was also due to ignorance of the mechanics of epidemic arrests. By and large, the organs had no profound reasons for their choice of whom to arrest and whom not to arrest. They merely had overall assignments, quotas for a specific number of arrests. These quotas might be filled on an orderly basis or wholly arbitrarily. In 1937, a woman came to the reception room of the Novokharevkazh NKVD to ask what she should do about the unfed, unweaned infant of a neighbour who had been arrested. They said, "Sit down, we'll find out." She sat there for 2 hours, whereupon they took her and tossed her into a cell. They had a total plan which had to be fulfilled in a hurry, and there was no one available to send out into the city, and here was this woman already in their hands. Universal innocence also gave rise to the universal failure to act. Maybe they won't take you. Maybe it'll all blow over. A.I. Ladashensky was the chief teacher in a school in remote Kologriv. In 1937, a peasant approached him in an open market and passed him a message from a third person. Alexander Ivanich, get out of town, you are on the list. But he stayed. After all, the whole school rests on my shoulders, and their own children are pupils here. How can they arrest me? Several days later, he was arrested. Not everyone was so fortunate as to understand at the age of 14, as did Vanya Levitsky. Every honest man is sure to go to prison. Right now my papa is serving time, and when I grow up they'll put me in too. They put him in when he was 23 years old. The majority sit quietly and dare to hope. Since you aren't guilty, then how can they arrest you? It's a mistake. They are already dragging you along by the collar and you still keep on exclaiming to yourself, it's a mistake. They'll set things straight and let me out. Others are being arrested en masse, and that's a bothersome fact, but in those other cases there is always some dark area. Maybe he was guilty. But as for you, you are obviously innocent. You still believe that the organs are humanly logical institutions. They will set things straight and let you out. Why then should you run away? And how can you resist right then? After all, you'll only make your situation worse. You'll make it more difficult for them to sort out the mistake. And it isn't just that you don't put up any resistance. You even walk down the stairs on tiptoe as you are ordered to do so your neighbours won't hear. At what exact point then should one resist? When one's belt is taken away? When one is ordered to face into a corner? When one crosses the threshold of one's home? An arrest consists of a series of incidental irrelevancies, of a multitude of things that do not matter, and there seems no point in arguing about any one of them individually, especially at a time when the thoughts of the person arrested are wrapped tightly around the big question, what for? And yet all these incidental irrelevancies taken together implacably constitute the arrest. Almost anything can occupy the thoughts of a person who has just been arrested. This alone would fill volumes. There can be feelings which were never suspected. When 19-year-old Yevgenia Doyorenko was arrested in 1921, and 3 young Chekists were poking about her bed and through the underwear of her chest of drawers, she was not disturbed. There was nothing there, and they would find nothing. But all of a sudden they touched her personal diary, which she would not have shown even to her own mother, and these hostile young strangers reading the words she had written was more devastating to her than the whole Lubyanka with its bars and its cellars. It is true of many that the outrage inflicted by arrest on their personal feelings and attachments can be far, far stronger than their political beliefs or their fear of prison. A person who is not inwardly prepared for the use of violence against him is always weaker than the person committing the violence. There are a few bright and daring individuals who understand instantly. Grigoriev, the director of the Geological Institute of the Academy of Sciences, barricaded himself inside and spent 2 hours burning up his papers when they came to arrest him in 1948. Sometimes the principal emotion of the person arrested is relief and even happiness. This is another aspect of human nature. It happened before the revolution too. The Yekaterinoдар schoolteacher Serdyokova, involved in the case of Alexander Ulyanov, felt only relief when she was arrested. But this feeling was 1,000 times stronger during epidemics of arrest when all around you they were hauling in people like yourself and still had not come for you. For some reason they were taking their time. After all, that kind of exhaustion, that kind of suffering is worse than any kind of arrest. Not only for the person of limited courage. Vasily Vlasov, a fearless communist, whom we shall recall more than once later on, renounced the idea of escape proposed by his non-party assistants, and pined away because the entire leadership of the Katy district was arrested in 1937, and they kept delaying and delaying his own arrest. He could only endure the blow head on. He did endure it, and then he relaxed. And during the first days after his arrest, he felt marvelous. In 1934, the priest, Father Irakli, went to Alma-Ata to visit some believers in exile there. During his absence, they came 3 times to his Moscow apartment to arrest him. When he returned, members of his flock met him at the station and refused to let him go home, and for 8 years hid him in one apartment after another. The priest suffered so painfully from this harried life that when he was finally arrested in 1942, he sang hymns of praise to God. Resistance? Why didn't you resist? Today, those who have continued to live on in comfort scold those who suffered. Yes, resistance should have begun right there at the moment of the arrest itself, but it did not begin. And so they are leading you. During a daylight arrest, there is always that brief and unique moment when they are leading you, either inconspicuously on the basis of a cowardly deal you have made, or quite openly. Their pistols unholstered through a crowd of hundreds of just as doomed innocents as yourself. You aren't gagged, you really can, and you really ought to cry out that you are being arrested, that villains in disguise are trapping people, that arrests are being made on the strength of false denunciations, that millions are being subjected to silent reprisals. If many such outcries had been heard all over the city in the course of a day, would not our fellow citizens perhaps have begun to bristle? And would arrests perhaps no longer have been so easy? In 1927, when submissiveness had not yet softened our brains to such a degree, 2 Chekists tried to arrest a woman on Serpukov Square during the day. She grabbed hold of the stanchion of a street lamp and began to scream, refusing to submit. A crowd gathered. There had to have been that kind of woman. There had to have been that kind of crowd too. Passers-by didn't all just close their eyes and hurry by. The quick young men immediately became flustered. They can't work in the public eye. They got into their car and fled. Right then and there, she should have gone to a railroad station and left, but she went home to spend the night. And during the night, they took her off to Lubyanka. Instead, not one sound comes from your parched lips, and that passing crowd naively believes that you and your executioners are friends out for a stroll. I myself often had the chance to cry out. On the 11th day after my arrest, 3 Smersh bums, more burdened by 4 suitcases full of war booty than by me, they had come to rely on me in the course of the long trip, brought me to the Belarusian station in Moscow. They were called a special convoy, in other words, a special escort guard, but in actual fact their automatic pistols only interfered with their dragging along the 4 terribly heavy bags of loot they and their chiefs in Smersh counterintelligence on the Second Belarusian front had plundered in Germany, and were now bringing to their families in the fatherland under the pretext of convoying me. I myself lugged a 5th suitcase with no great joy, since it contained my diaries and literary works, which were being used as evidence against me. Not one of the 3 knew the city, and it was up to me to pick the shortest route to the prison. I had personally to conduct them to Lubyanka, where they had never been before, and which in fact I confused with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I had spent 1 day in the counterintelligence prison at Army headquarters, and 3 days in the counterintelligence prison at the headquarters of the front, where my cellmates had educated me in the deceptions practiced by the interrogators, their threats and beatings, in the fact that once a person was arrested he was never released, and in the inevitability of tenor, a 10-year sentence. And then by a miracle I had suddenly burst out of there and for 4 days had travelled like a free person, among free people, even though my flanks had already lain on rotten straw beside the latrine bucket. My eyes had already beheld beaten up and sleepless men, my ears had heard the truth, and my mouth had tasted prison gruel. So why did I keep silent? Why in my last minute out in the open did I not attempt to enlighten the hoodwinked crowd? I kept silent too in the Polish city of Brodnica. But maybe they didn't understand Russian there. I didn't call out one word on the streets of Bialystok. But maybe it wasn't a matter that concerned the Poles. I didn't utter a sound at the Volkovisk station. But there were very few people there. I walked along the Minsk station platform beside those same bandits as if nothing at all were amiss. But the station was still a ruin. And now I was leading the Smersh men through the circular upper concourse of the Belarusian radial subway station on the Moscow Circle line, with its white-ceilinged dome and brilliant electric lights, and opposite us, 2 parallel escalators thickly packed with Muscovites, rising from below. It seemed as though they were all looking at me. They kept coming in an endless ribbon from down there, from the depths of ignorance, on and on beneath the gleaming dome, reaching toward me for at least one word of truth. So why did I keep silent?